Kristan T here at the Rundown Live, and I'm here with a bunch of militia. They're protecting a local car shop across the street. I saw yesterday there's video of it on YouTube of this one burn.
This was August 25th, 2020, and you'll see he captured Kyle Rittenhouse briefly, running down the street with his rifle. But I wanted to portray some of what was going on, some of what he captured. He had like an hour and a half long video. But this is just a couple of captures from it of what was going on, the kinds of people that were hanging out and there on the corner of the gas station, and what was going on that night. Also, let me say this. Militia, that's a loaded word, and it's been made unnecessarily so by the political class and the media and the demagogues who have tried to make it out to be something sinister and they've done this since the 90s, equated the citizen militia movement with white supremacist Nazi groups. And let's just suffice it to say, I'm not going to go through that whole thing now. Let's just note something. The unorganized militia is a concept that goes back to before the founding of this country. It goes back, in fact, to England, where the rights that the English citizens claimed after the English Civil War among them were the rights to self-defense and the rights to form militia to protect the citizenry against a tyrannical government. And that right was carried over by the founders of our colonies, later the United States of America, and carried over into our Constitution, our federal Constitution, in the form of our Second Amendment, which briefly and sort of in a sideways manner recognized the validity of the militia, but the militias are really codified under state laws. And I don't know for other states, but I'll tell you, in my state, the state of Illinois, the militia includes all legally the organized militia, or let's say the unorganized militia includes all men of a certain age range. This might surprise you, but I think it's from 18 to 45. So you might be surprised to find out that you are a part of the Illinois unorganized militia, according to the law, the highest law of the state, the Illinois State Constitution. This is different from the unorganized militia, which is headed by the governor. Now, we could go into the history. I only have looked into the history in Illinois. The militia used to be locally organized and a bottom-up grassroots entity. It started with each township. Each town, each village had its guard. It had the township or town guard and the city guard, and then the county guard. And these units elected their own officers. So it was a bottom-up operation. And yes, they could be called out by the governor from the top down and commanded from the top down, but only in times of emergency or when the governor deemed it necessary to enforce the laws. Otherwise, they governed them in peacetime. They governed themselves from the bottom up. They were not appointed and controlled and managed from the top down by the governor. And certainly there was never any hint of the fact that they would be governed on an everyday basis by some federal power or by the Pentagon, which is more the case now, since they are more a nationalized entity. Legally, they're still an entity of the several states, but I'm very sure they're much closer to the national military now. They're a unit, in effect, a unit of the national military, for all intents and purposes. That was not the original intent of the organized militia laws, let alone the understanding of the unorganized militia, the whole people. We can find in the debates over the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, we could find references, historical references, that the militia is the whole people. The militia is the whole people, not only those of a certain age range, and absolutely not only those in the employ of the government. But that's getting far afield, but I just wanted to insert that, just so you know that militia is not a dirty word. Just another couple of points. I think the Swiss today, or let's say until recent years, were a better example of what the concept of the militia and the concept of the people, the whole people as the militia, the whole people being armed to protect the whole society. And this also included an obligation to participate in training. Also, Israel. There is an obligation to participate, to serve in the military. Now, I don't like Israel's militarized nature, hyper-militarized nature. I don't like what they do with their military and the way that they use it and justify it to oppress another people, the Palestinian people. I don't like the uses to which it's put, but I like the concept that the Israelis have, that every person is a member of the militia and every person must serve their country. This gives you access to the weapons. This gives you the training. There's immeasurable development of your character, of your physical strength, your skills, etc. But also, your country's that much safer from whatever crime, internal crime, or external threats. You have to start asking why the political leadership in this country does not want the people, A, to be armed and have self-defense at all, but B, also to be trained and organized in such a fashion to be able to participate in our own defense.
And we have that fire, and people are hitting it with bats and a whole bunch of other things. And they're not being paid to be here, but they are doing it in service to the owner. So we got militia on the roof here, and it's pretty neat. They're here to protect the local neighborhood and buildings. These rioters and protesters, from the sounds of it. And the police are trying to send everyone home. How you guys doing? We're live on the Rundown Live. And as you can see, they're... Do you have a good angle? Yeah, very cool. And you guys local or no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I'm Kyle, by the way.
No, we'll do this.
Coronavirus.
Oh, dude, I'm not afraid of no coronavirus.
Yeah.
In fact, my shirt underneath, it says, I survived the coronavirus. There you go.
Take that restaurant.
Yeah, it's very possible. Was that?
I'd be safe. It's dangerous.
Oh, bro. Believe it or not, I've been doing this for about 12 years, so
Shit, how old are you?
41.
Freaking Christ.
And, if you guys see me get hit with something, I'm knocked out, that's when I need help.
Yep.
Or if it looks like somebody's going to beat me at the club, then I need help. Other than that, I can...
Other than that, I just love this dude's accent. He's a Yooper, originally.
Non-aggression principle. I don't want anyone hurt. They have medics too, and their medics are pretty helpful, even though they might be on the other side, if that makes sense. But they'll help me, okay?
We got medics too.
Okay, cool.
So we got you off.
So, do you guys mind? Is there a way up on the roof?
Now, just check out how good-natured Cal is. It just strikes me how he's friendly, he's good-natured, he doesn't seem tense, he doesn't seem angry. You notice all the weapons people had, the quote unarmed peaceful protesters had, baseball bats and metal planks and shit like that. You just gotta notice. And why do these people always come dressed for war if they're here for a peaceful protest? They come dressed in helmets, they've got gas masks, they've got weapons. As we know, many also had firearms. So your so-called peaceful protesters, and a lot of these people are just like young people LARPing. It's like they need something exciting to get into. And if you notice, like all forms of entertainment and amusement and things that people of that age range could occupy themselves with were shut down last summer. I don't know the exact state of things in Kenosha, but I know that Wisconsin, being a demagogue, leftist governed state by the leftists in Madison, Tony Evers and that crowd, had things pretty tightly locked it down and had things, especially things that young people like under 21 could go to, but things that adults could do, locked down. I want to check into that. But I'm pretty sure that your regular things, venues of entertainment, nightlife, amusement, private gatherings, etc., even churches were shut down at the time, or sharply curtailed as to their occupancy. So this, among all the other shit that they were pushing last year and continue to push, just has all kinds of people out of the streets. Also, of course, I'm not sure up there, but I know that whatever happens down here in Illinois and Chicagoland and Cook County in particular, they report all kinds of criminals out of both the pretrial detentions and the jails and in the prisons, convicts from the prisons, citing the quote coronavirus hazard. All kinds of motherfuckers were wandering around the streets who should not have been. And a lot of these people probably also found their way up to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and Milwaukee, and places like that to participate in the quote peaceful protest and get some, new TVs or new clothes or jewelry or something with the 5-finger discount.
So we got you on. We got everything.
So do you guys mind? Is there a way up on the roof?
Yeah, there is, but you gotta go through the shop, and we really want no one else going through.
Okay, no, that's fair. I thought I'd ask and make for some cool footage. But we got militia members on the roof.
They're there by permission. Were those rioters, those armed rioters, were they roaming around by permission? Were they invited? How many of those people came from out of town? Gabe Grosskreutz, at the very least. Well, I'm not sure, but at least one of those guys that Rittenhouse shot came from upstate Wisconsin. Okay? What were they doing there? At least Kyle Rittenhouse, this is his community. His father lived there. Mom and dad aren't together. Mom lives in Illinois. Dad lives in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Okay? All those anti-state line crossing people who also are usually the same people that don't want us to have a border with Mexico. And the reason we formed a union was so we could have freedom of travel and commerce between states. It's the reason this whole deal exists. Notice, by the way, how the blue Marxist governors and mayors have tried their damnedest to shut down and erect the borders between states, to shut down travel under the guise of coronavirus protections, shutting down travel, creating these onerous quarantine requirements, 2-week quarantines for you to re-enter Chicago, for instance. Or they had similar things in New York. All these blue governors had quarantines which amounted to basically stopping travel and commerce between states, which is completely prohibited in this country, which was founded on for the explicit principle of open and free travel and commerce between states. We decided to have an open union. and a confederation. And you see how these demagogues use the excuse of the coronavirus to erect the barriers where the law says they are not to be erected. And you see a sort of a continuation of this kind of thinking of, it's almost like, if we can't get our way, we're just going to break everything up. It almost seems like, when they're in power, they want to hyper-centralize everything, as you see Joe Biden doing right now. But last year, they wanted to put barriers between the states and break everything up. And they wanted their blue states to secede from the Union. Pretty much, they virtually seceded from the Union by erecting these barriers between states and even and cities. The neo-secessionist, neo-Confederate Democrats. Well, I'm not going to relitigate the Civil War, but secession to them is it's anathema and evidence of evil and racism when someone on the so-called right brings it up. But they've been actually doing it, in essence, whenever it suits their purpose, as it did last year.
Hey, do you guys know if there's any other militia in the area? I heard that there's a bunch of you guys out here. Is there any more militia in the area? I hear there's a bunch of you guys. All right, cool. I'm with the Rundown Live. I'm here just to cover the news. Just so you guys know who I am. I will. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. So we're going to go check.
It's been remarked by some astute observers that the last couple of years and the summer of hate and its continuation through 2021 in much a toned down form has sold more guns than anything ever in American history, and that has effectively killed all the arguments for gun control. We now have more people owning guns, packing than ever before, because the reasons for doing so were right in front of them, in their face, every day for the better part of, I don't know how many months. There are few better arguments for why you should own and be trained to use firearms than seeing the rampant riots and the rampant crime surge that we've experienced at the hands of these communists. Now, is this a little bit of an unintended consequence? I don't know. I assume that they've got contingencies for this. I assume that they foresaw this reaction, because it happens pretty much every time that there's a mass shooting or there's some infamous incident. People always buy more guns. Or every time the communists introduce a gun grab bill, or every time Obama and Biden started railing against guns, gun sales would go up. I think they know, and I think they're rather cynical, and I think before doing so, they moved their investments over and bought more Smith & Wesson and bought more, Desert Eagle, and bought more gun stocks. Because I think they know that they can do this, and they can move the value of shares up and down by their rhetoric and by their actions in Washington. So I think they're rather cynical about it, and they knew that people weren't going to give up our guns. And that's why they've decided, instead of a frontal assault on our liberty, that's why they decided to come in sideways with all this disease shit, this bioweapon shit, and play into our vulnerabilities and fears that are not protected by firearms. So they got us from a different angle. And we needed to be more armed and defending ourselves mentally against these psychological weapons. Everyone on the right, all the preppers, and all the patriots thought, oh, they're coming for our guns. More guns, more guns, more guns. You know, get prepped. They're coming for us. They're coming for us. Meanwhile, they came for your head first, psychologically inducing rampant fear, and it worked. So we need to be armed against all forms of weapons that they can bring against us. And anybody who's my age, and I'll say I'm over 40, maybe let's say over 45 even. Anybody my age can remember the LA riots of 1992. And you probably remember how the Korean store owners, who were particularly objects of attack due to racial animosities that I can't explain as a black person, you know, people thought Koreans were disrespectful and da 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 da. And one Korean shop owner had killed one black girl and murdered her, apparently. And so all of a sudden, all Koreans were bad and all Koreans were to be attacked and looted. So the Koreans fought back. They got AK-47s, civilian defensive tools, rifles, and stood in front of and on top of their shops in Koreatown and defended themselves very effectively. And that itself was a great argument for why do you need that weapon? Why do you need those rifles? And why do you need so many rounds? Because of this shit that y'all motherfuckers are manufacturing. And that, by the way, that was manufactured back in 92 as well. Probably some of the very same groups and individuals were involved in that Rodney King rioting in 92 as well. Jesse Jackson, you know what I'm talking about. Al Sharpton's, various communist groups. I think one of my subsequent videos, we're gonna go back. We're gonna go back to BLM, the burn, loot, murder Marxists, and how they existed 50 years ago, just under different names. They existed 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, just under a different guise and a different name. We're going to talk about that. That's going to be very fascinating. I've meant to get on this topic or write about this topic and since last summer. But there's so much fascinating information out there about how this is the same thing that they were doing 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, a century ago. I think they just feel that now is another revolutionary moment. Another revolutionary moment. I think maybe they feel that they won. Not quite so sure. But there was a lot of revolutionary fervor, especially along the century anniversary of their Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. And when did we start to see, of course, agitation didn't start in 2017, but it sure ramped up, didn't it?
So if you guys missed it in an earlier video, some of those Antifa kids were throwing bottles at me because I was into incognito today. I wore a Rundown Live hoodie and I should have been a little smarter.
Of course, this is the pattern, the so-called peaceful protesters of Antifa, which is basically just a violent, terroristic group, or it can turn violent at a moment's notice. They shelter people like Rosenbaum, the pedophile, and like Grosskreutz, who was caught prowling around in police stations a week before the Jacob Blake shooting. He was caught prowling around and apparently videotaping license plates on police personal vehicles at a police station. And this other character, Huber, and they're basically just scumbags who don't have lives, don't have anything to do. And they just go out and seek thrills through being violent or watching others be violent. They literally have no purpose in their lives. And this cat Tristan, he's been doing this for years. He says 10 years, I think, or 12 years. And I think he says he started covering protests in the Occupy movement. And I remember the Occupy situations in Chicago. And there was a contingent of these people. The violence has been ramped up in recent years, almost like turning a switch or turning a knob. And you know that those with the money and the influence have decided to turn up the heat. So I'm going to jump ahead to minute 43, or 1 hour 43 minutes on this.
Purge these days. Like at 8 o'clock, you get a buzz on your cell phone. Curfew, everyone get their weapons and come out.
This guy, Kristan Harris, seems to be kind of like an old school libertarian, even maybe leaning anarchist kind of guy who, you know, we old school types, we from back in the day who were around in the Occupy days. I'm not saying I was a occupier. I went to some of the rallies and protests. And, you know, protesters who took part in the Iraq war protests 03-04, as I did. And, you know, people from back in the day wanted everyone to get along and get together and unite under a populist banner of we're the little guys, we're standing up for the little guys against the globalists, the banksters, the big government, the big business. To have solidarity. And we could talk about our differences, you know. And I hung out with plenty of anarchists, as far as I know, nonviolent anarchists, not the black bloc types. Hung out with plenty of anarchists, and people identified themselves as anarcho-socialists, as well as anarcho-capitalists, libertarians, and maybe just anarchists who were just kind of peace first people who don't like aggression and violence. Now these Antifa people are a whole different thing. They're all about violence. In fact, they're all about violence first towards you if you hold or express opinions that they don't like or they classify as fascist. So there's certainly no common cause between me and those people. Me, a black person, I'm anti-fascist. But y'all act like the fascists. So I ain't down with that. Obviously, I'm anti-racist. But y'all are appropriating anti-fascism, anti-racism to pretty much do the opposite of what you claim you represent. This whole anti-racist action thing which started out as skinheads against Nazi skinheads. And all this contrived extreme left, extreme right, opposemes, problem, reaction, solution, Hegelian dialectic that they've been doing. Well, Nazi skinheads started to spring up in the 80s around the punk scene, and then you had anti-Nazi skinhead groups start to form to counter them and adopted pretty much the same violence, the same preemptive violence tactic. And so basically they were just two gangs. And the so-called anti-racists of anti-racist action, they just started shit. They started fights with people that they deemed to be racists or Nazis. Even peaceful Nazis who were just sitting there, who espouse some views that you may find abhorrent. But the anti-racist, so-called anti-fascists said, you can just go up to these people and stomp them out. This happened in a town very close to where I lived, Tinley Park, Illinois. They tore up a restaurant. These so-called anti-racists came in and tore up a restaurant, trying to get some people who they called Nazis. This was like 20 years ago. And these anti-racists, so-called, are a malignant force, as malignant as the so-called, as the racists or whoever they point at as the racists that they claim to be opposing. And all of that blended in and became a tributary into what we now know as Antifa. There was anti-racist action, and there was the original anti-fascist action. I think they probably all came from the same thing. but anti-racist action that branch was supposedly originally formed in downstate Indiana in, I think, the 80s or something. But anti-fascist action, so-called, which is the father of Antifa, actually formed in Germany in the 1930s out of the German Communist Party. The Communist Party is the reason why there was a Nazi party, creating the backlash in the form of the Nazi movement. And they continued to agitate in Germany, giving Hitler and the Nazis more fuel for their rise to power. Hegelian dialectic: problem, reaction, solution. One group clashing against another group, creating that synthesis. And anti-fascist action, quote unquote, through various permutations in Europe. They landed in the United States, I guess in the 60s or whenever, as the Marxist New Left was being fomented here. Then, of course, the Weather Underground was created, a sort of an even more radical underground insurgency movement. The anti-fascist action sort of merged with the Weather Underground and gave us what we have today, the so-called Antifa. And different, decentralized cells and offshoots like the John Brown Gun Club, which is their underground army. But anyway, I'm rambling on more than Led Zeppelin. for all you Zepp fans, that's you get that reference. Ramble